Ivan Aivazovsky, the man who painted the soul of the sea. Part 1. The Ocean's Whisper. There is a chilling legend whispered among sailors of the Black Sea. They say that Ivan Aivazovsky could paint the sea so vividly that, if you stared long enough at one of his canvases, you would hear the roar of waves in your ears. Some even swore that on stormy nights, his paintings would shimmer with phantom lightning, as if the ocean he captured on canvas was alive, restless, and forever trying to escape. But behind this miraculous talent was a boy from Feodosia, a boy who grew up not just by the sea but inside its song. The child of Feodosia. Ivan Konstantinovich Aivazovsky was born in 1817 in the small Crimean port town of Feodosia. His family lived in poverty, their wooden home battered by salt winds, their nights lit only by oil lamps. His father, of Armenian descent, struggled to provide, while young Ivan found solace in wandering the harbors. He would sit for hours on the breakwater, sketching the foam on scraps of paper. But his drawings were not ordinary. The townsfolk whispered about the boy who could make waves move with charcoal, who could make ships look as though they were about to leave the page. At night, when others slept, Ivan listened. The sea spoke to him. Its voice was not always gentle. Sometimes it whispered like a mother's lullaby, and sometimes it thundered like the wrath of gods. But always it called to him. The secret fire. As a teenager, Ivan drew obsessively. His schoolmasters complained that he paid no attention to lessons, except when it came to lines, forms, colors. His notebooks were filled not with arithmetic or grammar, but with storms and ships, horizons and lighthouses. His obsession grew to the point of madness. Villagers claimed they once found him standing chest-deep in the surf, sketchbook in hand, as waves crashed over his body. When asked why, he whispered, "You cannot paint the sea unless you let it drown you first." This dangerous devotion caught the attention of the town's governor, Alexander Kazanchev, who recognized the boy's gift and arranged for him to study at the Imperial Academy of Arts in St. Petersburg. It was there that Aivazovsky's legend truly began. St. Petersburg, the crucible. Imagine a boy from a salt-stained fishing town suddenly dropped into the grandeur of St. Petersburg. Marble halls. Gilded palaces. Endless galleries of history's greatest masters. Ivan was overwhelmed, yet his eyes, those storm-colored eyes, never lost focus. At the academy his talent exploded. Within months, professors were whispering, "This one is different. He does not copy the masters, he listens to the sea itself." His early work stunned the academy jury. His paintings were not static landscapes but living dramas. A single wave in his work seemed to contain both destruction and salvation. His storms carried the weight of mortality, while his tranquil sunsets promised redemption. The critics called him a prodigy. But Ivan himself was restless. He painted not for fame but for survival. He painted as if each canvas were a prayer, an exorcism of the chaos that stormed inside him. A duel with nature. One night, during his studies, Ivan reportedly climbed onto the academy's roof during a violent thunderstorm. Lightning ripped the sky, rain lashed down, yet he stood there, arms outstretched, sketching furiously as if defying the heavens themselves. The next day he delivered a canvas to his professor. On it, a tempest so real, so alive that one critic later wrote, "Looking at it, I feared my feet would be swept out from under me." This was the beginning of his duel with nature, a duel he would fight on canvas for the rest of his life. Rise of the painter of waves. By his early 20s, Ivan Aivazovsky was already being hailed as the painter of the sea. Tsar Nicholas I himself noticed his genius and offered commissions. Russian naval officers requested portraits of their ships. Aristocrats begged for his seascapes. Yet fame came with its shadows. Some critics accused him of excess, of melodrama, of making the ocean too beautiful, too theatrical. But Ivan refused to bend. "The sea," he once said, "is never ordinary. It is always a stage for gods." His paintings were not just art, they were visions, almost prophetic. When the Crimean War erupted years later, sailors swore his storm paintings felt like omens of battles yet to come. But behind the triumph there was a secret loneliness. Aivazovsky was adored but few understood him. He painted with feverish intensity, often refusing food or sleep for days. His studio smelled of salt water and turpentine, the air thick with oil fumes and candle smoke. He would stand before the canvas until dawn, his hand moving in rhythm with an invisible tide. When asked how he managed to paint the sea so perfectly without models, he replied, "The waves live inside me. I have seen them in dreams. I have drowned 1,000 times in my sleep." Part 2. Tempests Within. The Burden of Glory. By the 1840s, Ivan Aivazovsky was no longer just a promising artist, he was a sensation. His paintings were exhibited in Paris, Rome, and London. Critics abroad hailed him as the Russian Turner, a master of light and water. He stood in salons among aristocrats and emperors, yet deep inside he remained the boy from Feodosia, listening to the waves whisper secrets only he could hear. But with success came an invisible weight. Each masterpiece only increased the pressure to surpass himself. Every exhibition brought the same question: what next? And that pressure soon became unbearable. The war painter. In 1845, Aivazovsky was invited to join the Russian Navy on expeditions, tasked with capturing the fleet's glory. At first, it was exhilarating: ships unfurled like giants across the sea, the thrill of cannons, the majesty of naval power. But war revealed its true face. He painted the Crimean War, the siege of Sevastopol, the burning of ships. His once romantic seas turned dark, littered with wrecks and bodies. These canvases shook viewers not because of their beauty, but because of their terrifying honesty. In the Battle of Navarino and the explosion of a ship, you could almost smell the smoke, hear the screams, feel the hopelessness of men swallowed by waves. Sailors said his war paintings made their hearts stop, because they were too real. And yet, while the world applauded his skill, Ivan himself was haunted. He could no longer look at the sea without seeing the faces of the drowned. The lonely master. Back in his studio, Ivan's brilliance was inseparable from torment. He painted furiously, often locking himself inside for days, refusing food or visitors. Candles burned until the wax ran into pools, canvases piled high against the walls, each one carrying a piece of his soul. Those closest to him feared for his mind. Friends recalled nights when he would stumble out of the studio pale and shaking, whispering that he had fought the sea and barely survived. Marriage brought little peace. Though he loved his family, his obsession with painting consumed everything. His wife once confessed, "I live with a man who belongs not to me but to the ocean." The duel with critics. Even as his fame grew, so too did criticism. Some accused him of painting illusions, of making the sea too dramatic, too theatrical. A rival once sneered, "He paints not nature but theater curtains of water." These words cut Ivan deeply. For a man who lived by the sea's rhythm, to be accused of falsity was unbearable. He challenged his critics the only way he knew, with canvas. He unveiled the Ninth Wave, perhaps his most famous masterpiece. The painting depicts shipwreck survivors clinging to wreckage as the sea threatens to swallow them whole. The water burns with golden light, violent yet strangely divine. Hope and despair, death and salvation, all in one frame. When the critics saw it, they fell silent. The Ninth Wave was not illusion. It was truth. Shadows of mortality. But triumph did not heal him. The older he grew, the more Ivan seemed to sense his own mortality reflected in the waves. He confessed in a letter, "Each time I paint a storm, I wonder if it will be my last. The sea is my mirror, and each storm is closer to my end." The people of Feodosia told strange stories. They said that at night, Ivan would walk alone on the shore, speaking to the water as if to a lover or an enemy. Some swore they saw him paint with hands trembling, eyes wide as though possessed. One rumor claimed he once destroyed an entire series of canvases because he believed the sea had cursed them. Whether true or not, it reveals the shadow that always haunted him, the fear that his gift was not a blessing but a curse. The crisis of faith. By middle age, Ivan was torn between glory and despair. He had painted hundreds of works, honored by emperors, admired across Europe, yet inside he felt hollow. What was the meaning of endless waves? Why did the sea, despite all his attempts, remain unknowable? In his darkest years, he began painting visions of biblical floods, apocalyptic seas, oceans that swallowed cities. These were not just landscapes, they were confessions, cries of a man wrestling with God. "I have painted the sea my entire life," he wrote, "yet I do not know if I have captured it, or if it has captured me." Part 3, The Ocean's Crown and the Abyss. The Kingdom of Canvases. By the 1860s, Ivan Aivazovsky was no longer just an artist, he was an empire unto himself. His name echoed through Russia, Europe, even America. Collectors fought for his works, and critics who once mocked him now stood silent before his canvases. Feodosia, his humble birthplace, became a shrine to his art. He built studios that spilled with light, rooms where giant canvases towered like cathedral walls. The smell of oil paint, salt air drifting from the Black Sea, and the faint creak of brushes against canvas created a rhythm, a heartbeat of creation. Visitors to his studio described the experience as stepping into another world. The walls seemed alive with storms, horizons and dawns. One guest whispered, "It is not a room. It is an ocean disguised as four walls." The Ninth Wave's aftermath. His masterpiece, The Ninth Wave, painted in 1850, had elevated him into near-mythic status. It was more than a painting, it was a symbol of human struggle against nature's infinite force. People wept in front of it. Sailors crossed themselves as if in prayer. Nobles and peasants alike felt the same chill of mortality. And yet, this triumph became his burden. Audiences demanded more miracles, more oceans on fire with divine light. But how many times could a man wrestle the same storm without losing himself? The mentor of a generation. In his later years, Ivan became a patron as much as an artist. He opened schools, supported young painters, and transformed Feodosia into an unlikely art capital. Students flocked to him, eager to learn the secrets of capturing water and light. Yet he warned them, "Do not imitate me. The sea I paint is my own torment. Find yours." Some feared him. He was stern, demanding, with a gaze that pierced like lightning. Others adored him, claiming he could look at your painting for 2 minutes and tell you everything about your soul. The return of nightmares. But as Ivan grew older, his inner storms returned with greater force. His wife left him for years, unable to endure his moods and obsessions. Friends noticed how he often stared at the sea for hours, unmoving, as if waiting for something hidden beneath the waves. His late paintings grew darker, more apocalyptic. Canvases showed seas that devoured ships, skies split with fire, oceans rising against man. One of his most haunting works, The Black Sea, is almost empty, just a horizon, endless water and nothing else. No ship. No land. Only silence. It terrified those who saw it as if it was not a seascape but a vision of eternity. The Emperor's Shadow. Despite personal turmoil, Aivazovsky remained the pride of the Russian Empire. Tsars visited him, emperors commissioned him, generals sought his depictions of naval victories. But with this honor came compromise. He was often forced to glorify war, to turn bloodshed into beauty. Inside he detested it. "They ask me to paint victory," he once confided, "but all I see is death." Each imperial commission drained him, leaving him hollow. The ocean, once his sanctuary, became his battlefield. Obsession with immortality. By the late 19th century, Ivan was an old man, but his brush never slowed. He painted until his hands trembled, until his eyesight dimmed. "If I stop painting, I will die," he declared. He became obsessed with leaving behind not just works but a legacy that would outlast him. He poured money into museums, galleries, and even had his own works shipped to distant cities so his name could live everywhere the sea touched. At night, people swore they saw a lantern glowing in his studio long after midnight. Inside, Ivan stood before a half-finished canvas, whispering prayers to the sea, begging it to let him finish just one more painting. The Final Storm. In 1899, just before dawn, Ivan Aivazovsky completed his last work, The Explosion of a Ship. A vision of destruction, chaos, and fire, it was unlike anything he had painted before. Almost prophetic. The next morning he was found lifeless in his studio. His brush had slipped from his hand, the painting still wet on the easel. It was as if the sea had finally claimed him. Part 4. The Immortal Tide. The Funeral of a Titan. When news spread that Aivazovsky had died, the town of Feodosia froze in silence. Fishermen lowered their nets. Ships in the harbor draped their sails in black. The people carried his coffin through the streets, but it felt less like a funeral and more like the burial of an ocean. They placed him in the courtyard of his own museum, the very sanctuary he had built. As the coffin descended, the Black Sea erupted in a sudden storm, as if mourning the loss of its only interpreter. Eyewitnesses swore the waves crashed against the shore with a rhythm, like 1,000 voices crying his name. The studio after death. Weeks later, when people entered his abandoned studio, they felt an uncanny presence. Canvases leaned against the walls, unfinished seas, skies split with fire, ghostly horizons. The smell of turpentine still hung in the air. Brushes lay scattered as if waiting for him to return. Some claimed that at night, the studio glowed faintly, and if you stood by the window, you could hear the whisper of waves, though the sea was miles away. Others believed his spirit had not left. That Aivazovsky had poured so much of himself into his work that fragments of his soul were trapped in the paint itself. The curse of his paintings. Strange stories began to circulate. Sailors who owned his paintings swore they brought both fortune and doom. One ship captain kept the Ninth Wave in his cabin, claiming it protected him from storms. He sailed safely for years, until his ship was swallowed in a storm so sudden that survivors said it looked like the sea itself had risen to claim him. Collectors whispered that his darker works, the Black Sea, the explosion of a ship, carried a heavy energy. Standing too long before them could make you feel as though you were drowning. In the silence of museums, visitors often hear the faint roar of waves when they lean too close. The eternal rival. Some art critics of the 20th century dismissed Aivazovsky as repetitive, a painter obsessed with one subject. But the sea he painted was never the same. To him, every wave was a living soul, every horizon a boundary between man and eternity. He had not painted water. He had painted time. And that realization frightened even the skeptics. Because if the sea is eternal, then so is he. The final vision. Legend says that on the night before his death, Ivan Aivazovsky stood by the Black Sea one last time. Witnesses claim he stared into the horizon and whispered, "I hear them calling." When asked who, he only smiled and said, "The waves I never painted." Legacy. Today, Aivazovsky's works hang in museums around the world. But in Feodosia, by the sea that raised him, his spirit feels alive. Travelers often describe a strange sensation when standing before his paintings there, as if the sea itself is breathing through the canvas. And every time a storm rises over the Black Sea, locals whisper, "The old master is painting again." Epilogue. Ivan Aivazovsky was not merely a painter of oceans. He was a man who battled storms within and without, who translated eternity into color and light. His canvases are not silent. They move, they roar, they consume. To look at them is to remember that the sea is never truly still, and neither is the soul of the man who gave it voice. Even now, more than a century later, his waves have not died. They rise, they fall, they return. Just like him.